The operating room was a symphony of precision, a place where time seemed to both stand still and race forward. The rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor, the soft hum of the ventilation system, and the occasional clink of surgical instruments created a familiar backdrop to Dr. Jonathan Hayes's world. He had been a surgeon for over 15 years, and the operating table was his domain. Today, however, something felt different. He couldn't quite put his finger on it, but there was an unease in the air, a tension that made the sterile environment feel colder than usual. Before we dive, where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments. And while you're here, hit that like button, share with your friends, and subscribe so you never miss a story that will leave you speechless. Now let's get into it. Jonathan adjusted his surgical mask and glanced at the patient's chart one more time. The name was unfamiliar, Emily Carter, but the details were grim. A car accident, multiple internal injuries, severe blood loss. Time was of the essence. He took a deep breath, steadying himself. This was just another surgery, another life to save. He had done this countless times before. He could do it again. The doors swung open and the patient was wheeled in. Jonathan's eyes flicked to the figure on the gurney, and for a moment the world stopped. His breath caught in his throat, and his hands, usually so steady, trembled slightly. It was her, Emily, his Emily, the woman who had once been his everything, the woman who had walked out of his life 5 years ago without so much as a goodbye. Her face was pale, her features slack, but there was no mistaking her. The same delicate nose, the same full lips, the same cascade of dark hair now matted with blood. Jonathan's mind raced, memories flooding back in a torrent. Their laughter, their fights, their dreams. The way she had looked at him that last night, her eyes filled with tears as she told him she couldn't do it anymore, couldn't be with him, couldn't explain why. Dr. Hayes? The voice of the anesthesiologist snapped him back to the present. Are you ready? Jonathan nodded, though his heart was pounding. He couldn't let his emotions get in the way. Not now, not when her life was on the line. He took his place at the head of the operating table, his hands moving automatically as he began the procedure. But as he made the first incision, he felt a strange disconnect, as if he were watching himself from afar. The surgery was complex, more so than he had anticipated. The accident had caused significant damage to her liver and spleen, and there was internal bleeding that needed to be controlled. Jonathan worked methodically, his training taking over, but his mind kept drifting back to the past. He remembered the first time he had met Emily at a medical conference in Chicago. She had been a nurse then, bright and passionate, with a smile that could light up a room. They had hit it off immediately, their connection instant and electric. As he worked to repair the damage to her liver, Jonathan found himself recalling their first date. They had gone to a small Italian restaurant, the kind with checkered tablecloths and candles and Chianti bottles. They had talked for hours about everything and nothing. He had told her about his dream of becoming a surgeon, and she had listened with rapt attention, her eyes shining with admiration. That night he had known she was someone special, but now, as he carefully stitched together the torn tissue, he couldn't help but think about the night she had left. It had been a cold, rainy evening, and they had been arguing. About what, he couldn't even remember now. But he remembered the look on her face, the way her voice had trembled as she told him it was over. He had begged her to stay, to talk it out, but she had just shaken her head, tears streaming down her face. And then she was gone. Jonathan's hands faltered for a moment, and he had to take a deep breath to steady himself. He couldn't afford to make a mistake. Not now. Not with her life in his hands. He pushed the memories aside, focusing on the task at hand. But as the surgery dragged on, the line between past and present began to blur. He remembered the way she used to laugh, the sound like music to his ears. He remembered the way she would curl up next to him on the couch, her head resting on his shoulder as they watched old movies. He remembered the way she had looked at him as if he were the only person in the world that mattered. And he remembered the pain of losing her, the emptiness that had consumed him in the months after she left. As he worked to stop the bleeding, Jonathan found himself wondering what had happened to her. Why had she left? Where had she gone? And why was she back now, lying on his operating table, fighting for her life? He wanted to ask her, to demand answers, but of course she was unconscious, her fate in his hands. The surgery was grueling, lasting several hours. By the time Jonathan finally closed the last incision, he was exhausted, both physically and emotionally. He stepped back from the table, his hands trembling as he removed his gloves. The room was silent, the tension palpable. He looked down at Emily, her face still pale but her breathing steady. She was going to make it. He had saved her. But as he stood there, staring down at her, Jonathan felt a wave of emotions crashing over him. Relief, anger, sadness, love. It was all too much. He had spent years bearing his feelings for her, convincing himself that he had moved on. But now, seeing her like this, he realized that he had never really let her go. She was still a part of him, deep down, in a place he couldn't quite reach. The nurses began to clean up, preparing to move Emily to the recovery room. Jonathan knew he should go with them, to monitor her progress, but he couldn't bring himself to move. He felt rooted to the spot, his mind racing with questions and emotions he couldn't begin to process. As the doors swung shut behind the gurney, Jonathan finally allowed himself to feel the weight of everything that had happened. He sank into a chair, his head in his hands, and let out a long, shaky breath. He had saved her life, but at what cost? The wounds of the pine had been reopened, and he wasn't sure he could bear it. For the first time in years, Jonathan felt truly lost. He had always been so sure of himself, so confident in his abilities as a surgeon. But now, faced with the woman who had once been his everything, he felt like a man adrift, unsure of where to turn or what to do next. As he sat there, alone in the empty operating room, Jonathan realized that this was more than just a surgery. It was a test, a challenge to everything he thought he knew about himself. And as he stared at the closed doors, he knew that the hardest part was yet to come. Because when Emily woke up, he would have to face her. And he wasn't sure he was ready for that. The recovery room was quiet, the only sound the soft beeping of the heart monitor. Emily lay still, her chest rising and falling with each breath. Jonathan stood by her bedside, his eyes fixed on her face. She looked so fragile, so vulnerable. It was a stark contrast to the strong, independent woman he had known. He reached out, his fingers brushing against hers. Her skin was warm, and for a moment, he allowed himself to imagine that everything was as it had been before, that they were still together, still in love. But then reality came crashing back, and he pulled his hand away, feeling a pang of guilt. He shouldn't be here. He shouldn't be feeling this way. She was his patient, nothing more. But try as he might, he couldn't shake the memories, the emotions that threatened to overwhelm him. As he stood there, lost in thought, Emily's eyes fluttered open. She blinked, disoriented, before her gaze settled on him. For a moment, there was no recognition in her eyes, and then slowly it dawned on her. "Jonathan?" Her voice was weak, barely a whisper, but it was enough to send a shiver down his spine. He forced a smile, though it felt strained. "Hey, Emily, you're in the hospital. You were in an accident, but you're going to be okay." She frowned, her brow furrowing as she tried to piece together what had happened. "An accident?" He nodded, his heart aching at the confusion in her eyes. "Yes, but don't worry, you're safe now." She was silent for a moment, her eyes searching his face, and then softly she said, "You saved me, didn't you?" Jonathan hesitated, unsure of how to respond. I did what I had to do." Tears welled up in her eyes, and she reached out, her hand trembling as she grasped his. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for saving me." He felt a lump form in his throat, and he had to look away, unable to meet her gaze. "You don't have to thank me, Emily. It's my job." But she shook her head, her grip on his hand tightening. "No, Jonathan. It's more than that. I know it is." He didn't know what to say. He wanted to pull away, to distance himself from her arm, but he couldn't. Not when she was looking at him like that, with so much emotion in her eyes. "Emily," he began, but she cut him off. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice breaking. "I'm so sorry for everything, for leaving you, for hurting you. I never wanted to, but I didn't know what else to do." Jonathan felt his chest tighten, the pain of her words cutting deep. "Why, Emily? Why did you leave?" She closed her eyes, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I was scared," she admitted. "Scared of how much I loved you, scared of losing myself in you. I thought if I left, I could protect myself. But I was wrong. I've regretted it every day since." Jonathan felt a surge of emotions. Anger, sadness, love, swirling together in a chaotic storm. He wanted to yell at her, to demand why she had waited until now to tell him this. But at the same time, he wanted to pull her into his arms and never let her go. Instead, he just stood there, his hand still in hers, his heart aching with the weight of everything that had been left unsaid. "I don't know what to say," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. Emily opened her eyes, her gaze locking with his. "You don't have to say anything," she said softly. "Just stay with me, please." Jonathan hesitated, torn between his professional ethics and his personal feelings. But in the end, he knew there was only one choice he could make. "I'll stay," he said, his voice firm. "I'll stay as long as you need me." And as he sat down beside her, holding her hand in his, Jonathan realized that this was more than just a surgery, more than just a reunion. It was a second chance, a chance to heal the wounds of the past and maybe, just maybe, find a way to move forward together. The days that followed were a blur. Emily's recovery was slow but steady, and Jonathan was by her side every step of the way. They talked, really talked, for the first time in years. They shared their regrets, their fears, their hopes for the future. And slowly, tentatively, they began to rebuild the trust that had been shattered so long ago. It wasn't easy. There were moments of tension, of doubt, of pain, but through it all, they held on to each other, determined to make it work this time. And as Jonathan watched Emily grow stronger, he realized that this was more than just a second chance. It was a new beginning, a chance to rewrite their story. And this time, he was determined to get it right. The last mission had been more than just a surgery. It had been a journey, a test of love and resilience. And as Jonathan stood by Emily's side, watching her smile for the first time in what felt like forever, he knew that they had both come out stronger on the other side. The wounds of the past would always be there, a reminder of what they had been through. But they were no longer bleeding, no longer raw. They were scars, marks of survival, of endurance. And as Jonathan took Emily's hand in his, he knew that they were ready to face whatever the future held, together. The last mission had been a turning point, a moment of reckoning, but it was also a beginning, a chance to start anew. And as they walked out of the hospital, hand in hand, Jonathan knew that this was just the first chapter of their new story, and he couldn't wait to see where it would take them. As the screen fades to black, a soft, heartfelt melody plays in the background. The words "The Last Mission" appear in elegant white text, slowly dissolving into the darkness. A voiceover begins, calm yet filled with emotion. Life is a series of moments, some filled with ennui, others with pain, but all of them shaping who we are. Jonathan and Emily's story is a reminder that even in our darkest hours, there is hope for healing, for forgiveness, and for new beginnings. Their journey was not just about survival, but about rediscovering love and finding the strength to face the past. The screen transitions to a gentle call to action. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like this video and share it with someone who needs a reminder that second chances are possible. And if you're not already part of our community, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. Your support helps us bring more powerful emotional stories like this one to life. Thank you for watching. And remember, every ending is just the start of a new chapter. See you in the next video. The screen fades out with the channel's logo and a simple message. Subscribe for more stories that move the heart.